Okay, so my name is Jessie St. Cyr, and I am the principal owner of St. Cyr Consulting. Just a little bit about my background in the business. I'm an employment attorney by trade, a certified D&I practitioner, and former HR executive with nearly 20 years of organizational and board level experience. I've led award-winning statewide diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. And through St. Cyr Consulting, we focus on leadership development, strategic HR solutions, and D&I strategies. I would love to introduce my team of consultants who are with you today. And I will share a little bit about their background. I will start with the gentleman among the group, Terry Carter. He has over 40 years of professional work experience and has been in management consulting for some time. And he has exceptional experience developing and managing complex relationships in academic, philanthropic, and core business environments. He is a graduate of Fisk University and has been a graduate scholar at the Boston University College of Communication. He is actually an author of 5 books on faith and life-inspired poetry, and he's the poet laureate of the city of Medford. Then we have Nicole, who is an attorney with over 10 years of combined experience in legal and compliance advisory roles. She is a certified D&I practitioner. She started her career in employment discrimination law firm based in New York. She is also a graduate of Hofstra University School of Law and was admitted to the New York Bar in 2012. She speaks conversational Spanish, and she brings considerable policy development and D&I experience to us. Then we have Anna, if you guys can wave at the folks. So Anna is a speaker, author, mental health coach, and consultant with over a decade of experience helping individuals, couples, families, and organizations managing change and increasing mental and emotional wellness. She is also an author. She holds a BA in psychology with a minor in Latino studies from Northeastern University. She has a master's in counseling with a concentration of Latino mental health from William James College. And then last but not least, we have Dr. Tamika Jacques. Dr. Jacques, if you could just wave to everybody. She is a motivational visionary workforce specialist, D&I consultant. She is also a published author of Brown Girl's Guide to Employment and Networking, which reached #1 on Amazon under the topic of vocational education. She earned her educational doctorate in educational leadership from Johnson and Wales University, has a master's in college student development and counseling from Northeastern, and a bachelor's in international economics from Suffolk University. So I want to thank the consultants, my team, for joining me on this very important conversation. And I thank you all for making the time to be here, because it has been truly a year of crisis for all of us. And, you know, there is a saying, and I believe Winston Churchill said it, that we should never waste a crisis. And the reality is that there are so many lessons that we have learned from the last 18 months, lessons that we cannot overlook, lessons that will help us to identify the cracks in our infrastructure and our foundations so that we can address those issues and build stronger and as we adjust forward. And so this conversation is really an opportunity to help you as leaders, as executives, as professionals, So as you adjust forward, we're going to provide you some tips, tools, strategies, and thoughts on how you can do that effectively. So without further ado, I'm going to start, and the panel is going to share their thoughts based on these questions. And you'll have an opportunity to ask questions throughout. You can put them in the chat. I will be monitoring the chat. If you'd like to unmute yourself and share your question, just please raise your virtual hand and we will get to you as soon as possible. I will make sure to leave ample time towards the end of this conversation so you can join us, so you can ask your questions then as well. Okay, but in the interim, if you could please just mute yourself so that we can hear from the panelists. So the first question is, what is the top 1 or 2 lessons you think we should learn or gain from the last 18 months? And I would actually ask if Terry, if you could start with your answer, if you could just unmute yourself.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Jesse, for giving me this opportunity to join this august group. And I think there are a couple things that I, kind of want to start with. And one of the things that we have talked about as a group is this whole notion of the environment that you're beginning to bring folks back to. A lot of folks have been on remote. A lot of folks have been on virtual. A lot of offices are opening back up and starting to ramp up with bringing their people back to the workplace. So this is both a challenge and an opportunity. The opportunity is that, the environment that used to be cannot be anymore. So, this whole notion of getting back to normal, really needs to be kind of exploded, and a new work environment has to be created. One, you're not only going to be bringing your seasoned employees back, but you're probably going to have some new hires. They're going to be folks that left the organization for various reasons. They're going to be folks that, that saw opportunities to, take on new responsibilities elsewhere. So you're probably going to be looking at not only bringing back your seasoned people, but bringing on new employees. So it's critical that you create an environment, one, that is welcoming and embracing of the employees that you had already, but also that takes advantage of new energies to bring back to bring new employees on board with a new sense of the vitality of your organization. So I think that's really one of the keys, is to take a broad assessment of what you used to be as a workplace, as a culture, as an environment, and start to tweak and start to work on making that environment even more engaging, even more embracing, inclusive, and appetizing for the folks that are coming back, who have trepidations, and the new folks that are coming on board that have no idea of what kind of organization you are, or for that matter, what they're getting themselves into. Okay, and that's probably a big enough one to count as 2, Jesse. So I'll definitely defer to our colleagues.
And I thank you for that, Terry. And at the top of the session, I talked about just the feeling of exhaustion that we're all experiencing. If you think about it, we have been in crisis mode since February, March of last year. I see someone with their mask on in the workplace. We've had to wear masks. We have to take off masks. We're getting all kinds of information from the government, from the CDC, about what's required of us. We've been in lockdown. We've seen the murder of George Floyd. The world has actually seen it. And there are so many disparities that are being revealed or unveiled at this point. And we're trying to manage all of that. And Terry spoke to that earlier, which is, this is actually coming into the workplace as well. So we're feeling all of these changes. We're trying to navigate through these crises, and our employers and leaders and everyone is trying to navigate through this all at once. And now with the Delta variant, again, we thought we were out of this. Now we're back in again, and we have to make plans as employers to support ourselves and to support the workforce. So Anna, Tamika, Nicole, any thoughts on what are the lessons we should be learning from the last 18 months and moving forward?
Yeah, I can answer. I think the number one thing that I've noticed, and hi everybody, good afternoon, is that work from home does actually work for some people. And there were a lot of big companies that fought against it before the pandemic, and they didn't set themselves up for a situation like this. And they have found like, wow, actually we're getting more productivity out of our employees. And, people are staying online, they get up, they log on, and they don't log off till 6:30. So it does work for some people. So I do think that's one of the big lessons that employers had to realize, like, okay, maybe they were wrong about that. Mm-hmm. And then also, and then we can touch on this later as well, just dealing with specifically Black women, is that a lot of Black women are, the work from home situation has benefited us the most, because we're not dealing with microaggressions in the workplace. We don't have to worry about our hair changing today and tomorrow and getting commentary on it. And so it's actually like we're feeling better about it. And a lot of Black women, they're not trying to go back in the office. We're enjoying our safe space at home where we're not dealing with, just random questions that could tick you off during the day about for whatever reason, mainly dealing with hair. But there was a New York Times article that came out about it, and Black women were saying, hey, we're not going back. And so that's a thing. Those are the two biggest things. We're not putting up with microaggressions. We just won't go back in, and work from home does work. We are productive.
So we are productive while working from home, but studies have shown we're working longer hours from home as well, right? And so there needs to be balance. And one of the trainings I did earlier this year, and as part of the Leadership at Work series on Teachable, I talked about the need to reprioritize, reset, and to make sure that the culture and the values of your organization are connected to the people who are working from home. And an inclusive work environment is absolutely important as we continue to navigate this crisis or these crises. And Nicole's point, a unique point about microaggressions and what women of color experience, particularly Black women in the workplace, and what we don't have to worry about now that we're working from home. I think that that's a unique perspective, and one that is worth noting. So Tamika, I know you had some thoughts on this.
Yeah, so I just want to piggyback off of Nicole as she made her points, because, like you said, we are working harder, we're working longer, everyone is. And one thing that amazes me, speaking to the employers is, they can hire you to do a job, but they didn't necessarily trust you to do the job. So as Nicole said, working from home, if we're going to adapt in the next however many months it takes to, kind of get out of this crisis mode, you really have to be able to know that when you hire someone, that you are trusting them. Because in the past, we've hired someone and we'll say, no, I don't trust you to work at home. And now they just didn't have a choice. And so it really is about trusting who you hire. And on top of that, increasing your training is something that is definitely going to have to come about, because as Nicole said, there are things as a Black woman specifically that we don't have to deal with anymore during the day. But also I can give an example of something that happened virtually where someone introduced themselves, introduced their name, and someone said to them, wow, that, you have a really long name. This person was from Africa. They were interning. We should just call you something else because that's not going to work for us, right? And so in that case, in that point, that intern walked away like really upset on her first day. And so it just goes to show you, yes, virtually I can do the work, but we are going to have to increase. If we're going to stay virtual, then employers are going to have to increase their training, whether it is, I know Anna will talk about this, dealing with your health, self-care, but also how do you deal with those microaggressions that might happen virtually? How do you deal with still talking about being inclusive, having a diverse employees? So I would just say, yes, you have to, step up. The employers have to really be flexible on trusting their employees to get the work done while they're home, but also step up in the professional development trainings as well. That should not go away just because we all are virtual. It should be even more intense now that we all are virtual and we cannot see each other.
Thank you for that, Tamika. And that is so important because you're talking about workforce culture virtually, right? So whatever values you have in your organization, that should not leave the room or leave the space because people are working from home. You have to communicate, you have to engage and ensure that people can participate fully and they can show up being their best selves and not having to worry about comments like that, and which would disengage anyone and feel, like they're not welcome in that organization. So Dagmar from the Las Colinas Irving Las Colinas Chamber of Commerce, thank you for joining us. She says, finally, mental health is being recognized equally to physical health. Well, at least in the beginning. Yes, and there have been a number of studies from CDC and other organizations about the increase of people experiencing mental health while working from home. And the reality is it's not just working from home, it's working from home and my spouse is at home or my partner is at home, my children are at home. I'm having to manage their schoolwork as well. And a lot of districts are going back on site, but could you imagine, I'm trying to manage my day-to-day responsibilities. I'm also managing my children, right? And working longer hours, feeling some flexibility, but also trying to engage in all these conversations and all these things that are happening. So Anna, can you talk about mental health and how that's affected during the last 18 months or how we're affected in this area?
Absolutely, Jesse, and everyone, all of our colleagues brought up some amazing points that we can definitely expound on later on when it comes to mental health. But I think the greatest piece is definitely the stress that has come from the last 18 months. Furthermore, I think it's really just acknowledging, it starts with acknowledging that we've all been through a collective trauma. At this point, I think it's the first step. I think that before it was sort of, trauma was violence or maybe abuse of some sort. At this point, everyone has experienced a collective trauma, and we all have to sort of change our views and our lens, especially as employers, to really think, okay, this person is not just an employee. So thinking about them as a whole person, how do we see them as, the mother, the brother, the sister, all these different roles that they play, and how were they impacted at home, because we don't know, how they were impacted, the losses that happened, due to COVID. And so the grief that they might have experienced, or balancing all of the different roles, or even experiencing some of their own, physical challenges, as well as the fact that some people already had trauma prior to this. So now things became exacerbated. The things that they were feeling and certain symptoms became exacerbated. Like, I was dealing with a little bit of depression. Now this has become something that I can't handle and I can't manage. So a lot of it is different levels and different degrees. And it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to diagnose ourselves. It's really creating cultures and environments in our work environments that just allow for the whole person, for all the experiences that everyone had, and making adjustments within our organizations that are really, safe, that people feel safe to be vulnerable, to be transparent, and not just robots. So how do we see our employees as more than just employees? They're just whole people with different experiences, as well as community. Community is going to be something that is going to be monumental and going back, right? It's not just people that are doing tasks and things of that nature, but really creating spaces where people have sort of a safe space to process, their experiences and things that happen, and how it's impacted their work. Because ultimately people also realized, I am more than just an employee, and I don't need this. I can go on and do something else. That's really, people are fed up ultimately, and they can't really express and have the language, but ultimately they're burnt out and they're fed up. And I think it's going to be really important for employers really to prioritize mental health by, hiring consultants and kind of taking evaluation of what are the values and how are we fostering a place that is conducive to having an environment that's safe for everyone, where they can be vulnerable and transparent about everything that's happened, along with the fact that it's not over, right? There's more to come. And so it's not just about doing the work with what happened, but also preventative and planning, not just for crisis, but again, for the preventative measures on how to help our employees get through this, not through this pandemic, but really everything that comes along in the future.
Thank you for that important note on mental health and wellness. And I think part of wellness is being able to reprioritize and reset. There's so much that we can get done in a day. And I believe, and it was Richard Branson, who is the chairman and of a number of Virgin businesses, but he's the chairman of Virgin Group. And he said, if you take care of your people will take care of your customers. It's not customers first, it's the people who actually service and support your customers that you have to invest in. Because at the end of the day, if they're engaged, if they're supported, if they're being developed, you're going to see increase in productivity. You're going to see increase in performance. You're going to see increase in engagement. You're going to see increase in profits. You're going to see increase in customer satisfaction. And Gallup has been doing a lot of research around engagement for decades, and they have a number of reports about that. And if you're in an organization and this is something that you've not been doing, or you need some support around that, please contact us and we can assist. But SHRM, the Society for Human Resource Management, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Forbes, everyone is reporting just what they're calling the great tsunami. People are leaving their jobs because, number one, organizations are saying, well, we're coming back on site, when there's no clear and convincing evidence that they need to be on site, right? And in some workplaces, it's necessary, right? Because you have to support customers in a person-to-person manner. But it's not always clear why everyone's returning on site. And so it's important for organizations to think about that. And to develop communication plans to help their employees understand the need, to understand the strategy, and to provide options, because we're all adults, right? To have options that they can think through with their supervisors and managers as they develop plans to return on site. It has to make sense. Another thing that employees have to think about is, And Deidre has here, leaders need training, education around trauma. Absolutely, all right? Training in communication around how you support your employees during this time. I'm surprised even now that so many organizations are still having challenges around this, because really they don't have the support, or they don't have the resources internally to guide their teams, and to partner with internal experts to support them. And so, you know, it's important that organizations plan, they strategize, they be realistic, so that they're not losing employees to their competitors because there's no thoughtful strategy around returning employees on site. So the next question I have, and feel free, please share your questions. If you have any questions or any thoughts, we can look at the chat and answer them as we continue to proceed with this conversation. We will take questions towards the end as well. So the next question I have is, what should employers expect as we continue to navigate through this crisis? And I'd like you guys to speak to vaccination policies as well, because a lot of organizations are considering what to do. There have been a couple of decisions, court decisions, about the legitimacy of a vaccination policy, or the mandate for vaccinations. So as employers, as leaders continue to adjust forward, what should they consider as they either return on site or continue working remotely, or maintain a hybrid work model?
I can start.
Oh, go ahead.
Yes.
Yeah, so with the vaccinations, employers do have a duty to keep their workplace safe, and we're in new times, so that seems, you know, like the most logical route to go. But you know, it does create tension within the workplace, because there are people that feel strongly about it on both sides. And then on both sides, there are valid arguments on both sides. And so there are some people that want to claim a religious or medical exemption and feel compelled to talk religion and their health within the workplace with the new mandates. And so it makes it uncomfortable, and that's an issue I would make sure that employers tread very lightly. You never want to put somebody in a position where their back is against the wall, which is why a vaccination policy, just having something in place, you know, to direct this information to, you don't have to, like, your boss should not be asking you, everything should go to HR, because you don't want to create these conversations with your supervisor. It's a recipe for disaster, and there's liability just written all over it. So, you know, I definitely think there's not going to be a new normal. I mean, there's not going to be a normal. It's that we have to create our new normal. So everybody's saying we have to do this so we can return to normal. We're not ever going to return to normal. It just is what it is. It's not going to happen. So we just have to proceed with that knowledge in mind, knowing, hey, we have to create new policies. We have to create new procedures. There's new protocols. Everything is brand new. And we have to make sure, in trying to bring everybody back to the office, that we do this, you're extremely cautious. And so my biggest recommendation would say, keep the managers out of it and just keep it between HR. Like, it should never be a discussion in the workplace.
So, and I just to clarify, I think you're referring to medical information and vaccination status. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, so, you know, in terms of policies and vaccination policies, there's no one size fits all, okay? There's no one size fits all. So one thing I would recommend to all leaders and employers, don't find something off the shelf. And the reason why you don't want to do that is because every organization is different. The jobs are different. What's required of employees are different. Some employees need to service and support folks in person. They have to work together physically, right? So, and there might be a need for vaccination because of the increased health concerns, right? But in other positions, you may not have that, right? So every employer has to really think about a number of things. Number one, what's the business case for mandating vaccinations? And please note, we're not providing legal advice here. We're not providing you with any advice on what your policy should actually entail, but we're providing you with some thoughts on how to develop a policy that is for your organization. And I would ask again, if everyone could just mute yourself. Thank you. But in terms of policies, again, what's the business case for mandating vaccinations, right? And take an assessment of the jobs. And again, if people are meeting or supporting or servicing customers or working with other employees in closed spaces, and they can't socially distance and they can't wear, they have to wear masks, but there is increased risk, then, you know, that's maybe having vaccinations is something you want to consider. But you definitely want to partner with your legal department. You want to partner with human resources, because they are the internal experts that would guide you through this, okay? Some other things you have to consider, and Nicole mentioned this, you have the exemptions. Right, so there's the religious exemption, and then you have the medical exemption, right? And so you have to work with employees to understand and to partner with HR on this, because this can get really, really tricky. And these are hot button issues. So you don't want to go this alone, right? You need guidance, and to work with HR and to work with legal to understand what those those medical and religious exemptions are, and providing options. Some of the better written policies also include options. And one of those options are regular testing, so that everyone who is on site is being tested and is negative, and reducing the probability that anyone else would be infected with the virus. Make sure that your policies have points of contact in them, because you're not going to have all of the information available. We're all changing, we're all adjusting, and you have to make contact information available so that people know if they have questions, where to go. And as far as we've been saying this all along, to make sure that your managers, that your leaders are trained, they have the information. They don't have to be experts, that's not their job, but they need guidance from HR, from legal, and you bring in your communications experts as well, if you have them, to guide your managers through this. So any other thoughts on this particular point as we navigate forward? The vaccination policy is a big hot button issue. There have been some legal cases on this, and the organizations or employers who have been able to advance with their vaccination policies have done so because the business rationale was there, the scope for these policies were narrowly focused, there were many options available to the employees who might have been affected by this, clear points of contact. And it is clear also from my reading that they definitely consulted with their legal and HR experts. Any questions on this particular point as we move on? So I'm actually saying here, do we think that with FDA approval, people will accept mandatory vaccination practices. And I kind of spoke to that already. And this is just such a controversial topic. Everyone really has to make a decision that's right for them. But this is one of those times where we have to also think about how our decisions are also impacting others. And I am not a medical health expert, and I will not even try to speak to that, but everyone has to make a decision that's right for them. Organizations that decide to move forward with mandating vaccination policies have to really think about their rationale for doing so. They have to partner with their experts. They have to make options available. They have to consider those religious and medical exemptions, and they have to communicate, arm their managers, supervisors, and leaders with information and provide points of contact for everyone who has questions, that they know where to go. So one other question for the team. There's just been, again, so many changes. There's been after the tragic murder of George Floyd and a series of other racial incidences, there's been a flurry of displays of solidarity when it comes to diversity and inclusion. And I've spoken to different groups about what it looks like. I've presented on building blocks for D&I plan. Dr. Tamika Jacques was one of the co-presenters, and we're actually having a session again in September. But there's been a lot of talk and to some degree limited action. There are organizations that are very serious about diversity, equity, inclusion, and addressing systemic racism, bringing down the structural barriers to opportunities. And this is still an important conversation. It will always be an important conversation, given the changing demographics of the United States and the business case, the ethical case, moral case for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Having an inclusive workforce, a diverse workforce, increases innovation, according to the McKinsey report. Organizations that are more inclusive and diverse, they're able to think through issues and challenges uniquely and more creatively because of the different backgrounds of their teams. And so I'd ask Dr. Jacques and Nicole and Terry to speak to this. What are your thoughts on diversity, equity, inclusion as it pertains to how we adjust forward? And what would you share with participants today, as this is also something that is top of mind for many organizations?
I think one of the things that you can kind of look at is maybe 25 years ago, could have been a little bit longer than that. Consultants like us were being called into organizations to do an evaluation of competency as a basis for employment. And, we were using tools like the career architect, a 7 principles of highly effective, or, things like that, to kind of evaluate the organization and determine what, based on their culture, based on the work they were doing, what employees needed to, what stuff they needed to be made of. I think that what has to happen now is that you have to take a look at those competencies that you put in place 20 years ago and reevaluate whether or not they are the best competencies, in fact, for a changing, evolving and more inclusive workplace. And instead of maybe something like, multitasking and prioritizing skills, you want to take a real critical look at something like empathy as a competency, creativity and flexibility and adaptability of thinking, and cultural competency. You know, how easy is it for you to recognize and navigate, you know, the workplace when it's made up of so many different communities, when it's made up of ethnic communities, multi-ethnic communities, when it's made up of LGBT and Q communities, when it's made up of, you know, all of these different persuasions of people that think different ways about how to live their lives outside of the workplace, and then, you know, bring some of that into the workplace with them as well. And you have to have people who kind of understand, can navigate, can negotiate, can resolve conflict, and can team build in the midst of all of this changing stuff. So looking at the competency as part of the equation for building DE&I, for building diversity, equity, and inclusion into the workplace, that's going to be a key for me, to build a smarter workplace, in a more effective workplace, a workplace that really accommodates all of this stuff that people bring into the workplace with them, because we all do. And that's, the line employee who's coming in making just above minimum wage to the C-suite. We all have stuff that we're bringing to the table when we come to the workplace, or when we're at home working virtually. There's still a culture, there's still a workplace design in a workplace philosophy that we all still have to have. Okay. That's my story. I'm sticking to
it. Thank you. Anna, Dr. Jacques, Nicole, do you have any thoughts you want to add on? Yes.
Yeah, so I would, just to add on to what Terry said, thank you. I think he gave great comments, but I would just challenge employers to think beyond DE&I and put another E in there, equality, because it's one thing if you say, we are a diverse organization, but if I look into your organization and I only see diversity amongst maybe entry-level staff or middle management and not in your C-suite, then I really am going to challenge you to say, do the people that are underneath you, are they getting that equal chance to move up in the organization if that opportunity is there? And so oftentimes, as I did this week, I gave a workshop on equality versus equity, because there is a difference and you cannot put it all together. So for me, I would just encourage everyone to add on an additional E to make sure that, it's not just diversity. It's not just looking at, who is in your organization, whether it's race, gender, sexual preference, however you look at that, but it really truly is equitable going, from the bottom to the top, and that you're benchmarking. So you're not just saying, this is what we have, or you're putting the proper, programs in place so that you can benchmark and you can talk about that, a year from now, 2 years, whatever it is. But it's definitely important to put some benchmarks in place so that you can talk about it, not just broadly, but be able to share it narrowly. Because when you start talking to me about your organization, I am going to question you back. What does that mean? What does that mean in terms of who's represented in your organization? So my challenge would just be to add another E to, instead of just diversity, equity, and inclusion, but to add that, that other E in, so that we can make sure that it's equitable, as well as, exclusion. I've just lost my train of thought for a second, but just to make sure that everyone is included in the process.
I think that's an important point, and thank you, Dr. Jacques. The reality is that when it comes to diversity and inclusion, it's not just at the front line and entry-level positions. It should be throughout your organization. And leaders have a unique opportunity to leverage their platform, their resources, their influence to open doors of opportunity for others within the organization. And in building blocks Oxford D&I plan, we talked about the 4 C's for a successful and sustainable diversity and inclusion plan. And you have to have the capacity, you have to have the commitment, you have to have the funding, you have to have the support within your organization, top, bottom, and across the organization to ensure that your diversity inclusion strategy is successful and it's sustainable. One of the things I've been seeing, there's been a checkbox effort. We just want the training. Well, once the training is done, who's responsible? Right? Just bringing in someone to do training for you is not enough. You have to have ownership within the organization around diversity, equity, inclusion, and to Dr. Jacques' point, equality. It is not enough to do training. Your culture has to be inclusive. It has to be welcoming, and it has to be supportive of people from diverse backgrounds. And so Nicole and Terry, I don't know if you had any more that you'd like to add here.
Yes, I definitely wanted to add, you all brought up some amazing and great points, but I definitely wanted to add in terms of the culture, that's very important, the pillars and the culture of the organization, but it definitely starts with the individuals. And so having leaders really take the time to do the individual work, to really explore their own limiting beliefs and biases and their own experiences, because I think it definitely starts there. It's at the core. And so part of that, one of the suggestions really is, what would it look like if you were to hire mental health coaches and consultants for the company where there's exclusive use for the employees, from leaders to everyone in the organization, so that everybody can do the personal work and it's not coming out of their own pocket or even something that they have to search because, access, right? Mental health is a big deal and it's growing, but in terms of access, it's very difficult, for some people to access it or even have the time. Let's be honest, it's important, but you're like, okay, on my to-do list, find a therapist, find a mental health coach, and it stays there for a really long time, as opposed to having it as part of the benefits included in the company so that they have a space to be able to do the work. It's included, they have access, and every individual is doing that core work. So then it can, really be as a part of the foundation to the bigger picture in the culture. I also wanted to add something else. There were so many great points, and I feel like just throwing that out there, maybe a part 2 where we can continue this conversation, because it really has been so good. At least I've enjoyed it, even though I'm a part of it. But I actually lost my train of thought. There was another point. But yeah, it starts at the core and foundation with every individual, and really having the leaders explore their own personal, limiting beliefs and biases, et cetera.
Thank you. Thank you. Maybe we'll do a part 2. I'd like to see from the participants, would you like a part 2 of this conversation? Because again, we're in this for the long haul, and we really have to pace ourselves when it comes to change and leveraging the lessons that we've learned through this crisis. Deidre said that we have to think about psychological safety as we return back to the workplace, or as we continue to work remotely, whatever we decide to do. And psychological safety is about people sharing their ideas and also their concerns, and not feeling or experiencing repercussions because they've shared their concerns about the way we work, about vaccination policies, about an inclusive work environment. There is so much to unpack from these last 18 months, and we have to be diligent about understanding the lessons that we've learned, but also mindful that we can't make all of these changes at once, but we have to develop a strategy to be able to draw from the lessons that we learned, so that we don't try to go back to normal. And I think one of the reasons why we're trying to go back to normal is because change is scary. Change takes time. Change takes resources. Change takes skills. And when you're dealing with change management, there has to be a sense of urgency, but there has to be a clear strategy. And you have to bring all the people together to help manage that, whether it's diversity, equity, inclusion, whether it's policy development and communication, whether it's revisiting human resources to ensure that you have the capabilities necessary to support your talent strategies, to service your customers and constituents. Whatever the case is, there's still a lot to be done, and we have to weigh all of that with people just really being exhausted, right? And so again, I said this at the top, we have to reset, we have to reprioritize and engage people, understand where they are, so that we can support them appropriately. In a earlier conversation that I had, and Anna was my guest, and we were talking about inclusive communication and making sure that different parts of the workforce are represented in whatever strategy you have. So that includes including representatives from your employee resource groups, including leaders from different areas, making sure that your internal experts are part of the conversation, right? Whether that's surveying, having focus groups, et cetera. You have to make sure that your communications and whatever strategies you develop are inclusive. And so I'm just gonna check the chat here just to see if there are any questions. And so the Honorable Melvin Poindexter, how are you, Melvin, asked this question: can someone touch on the impact of COVID-19 mandates on Black and Brown owned businesses? Any thoughts there? Would anyone like to speak to that? And while you gather your thoughts, I think that's a great question. I am the owner of St. Cyr Consulting, and my team of consultants are all diverse individuals. And I would say COVID-19 has had a significant impact on communities of color, business owners of color. If you think about it, the many hurdles we've had to overcome just as people of color, but then in terms of access to resources, just trying to manage so much with limited resources has been difficult. This is not necessarily information that I have readily available that I can speak to, but personally, I can say that there's have been many, many challenges. I'm sure the SBA, Small Business Administration, and other organizations have information about that. But if anyone would like to speak to that, please share. And Terry, I think you had your hand raised. Feel free to share whatever you'd like.
I did. I'm going to deal with this for just half a second. And I have one other point that I wanted to touch on in terms of how it's affected Black and Brown businesses is, the experience of so many people of color in the business environment, who are entrepreneurial by bent, is still a fairly recent phenomenon. So when we experience these ripples on the pond, there are organizations who are already set up because they've been around so long, they've seen so much that they can handle the ripples on the pond. They can handle even the bigger waves. Maybe they can handle the tsunami. But businesses that just started and were on somewhat shaky footing to begin with, because of the culture of and embrace of the American business sphere for businesses of color, it's been difficult. It's been difficult, and some of this is anecdotal. I have a lot of friends who have small businesses who have told me trying to get stimulus money that was readily available to small businesses has been a bear, trying to navigate through the system and finally, acquiring some of those dollars, and then trying to retain what was a small customer base to begin with has obviously been difficult. And then trying to maintain those face-to-face relationships that are so important in driving new and small businesses has been difficult. And that's not even that, these aren't even businesses like restaurants, for instance, that have had, you know, the most ridiculous time of trying to hold themselves together. And 3 or 4 out of every 10 has not been able to, you know, maintain, has gone under, has gone out of business. So yes, it's been very difficult, to the Honorable Justice. It's been very, very difficult for businesses of color. The one other thing I did want to talk about, and I don't want to monopolize the time, but I think this is really important, is any businesses, large scale businesses in particular, that are not doing and have not been doing significant succession planning, that lack is at your peril, because right now folks are, you know, checking out in big numbers, and you're losing institutional history and knowledge more so than ever before in the history of American businesses. So if you haven't put some nuggets in place to try and both retain some of that organizational history and knowledge, as well as to, you know, to bring on board people who can quickly jump in and do the kinds of things and have the kinds of capacity that the people who have left and are leaving have, you're going to be in some trouble. So succession planning, building that rigor into your business is really, really key right now. Letting people go who are taking 25 and 30 years of institutional knowledge out the door with them and not having anything to put in place that's anywhere near significant, that's dangerous. And that's going to mean a big blow to your business. So I think succession planning is about as important, if not more important, than it's ever been before in the history of American businesses. I think it's huge.
Can I add to that, Jesse?
Yes, absolutely.
Just to the question that was asked regarding the COVID-19 around Black and Brown businesses, I think that this is an opportunity. As someone that's written a book on networking, I think this is an opportunity for those businesses also to network within their sector. Whatever their sector is, they need to go out and find other businesses that are like them, because when they come together and brainstorm, I'm sure they'll be able to help each other. One thing we've learned from this pandemic is that we can't do this alone. You know, if you're sick and you need someone to deliver groceries to, you've had to, because you were in isolation, you've had to, you know, learn how to do that, to get groceries delivered to you, or how to reach out to somebody. So I think we can, if we apply what we're doing in our daily lives, you know, more families were keeping in touch via Zoom, even though we're all exhausted on Zoom and these virtual meetings. But if you really learn how to network within your sector, I think there are others that can help you, and you can work out ways to help, you know, and I get it, you know, bottom line, we all have to make money on these businesses, but we can also come together as businesses and support each other. So I just encourage people, if you're having that, you know, one thing you can learn is to get into those sector networks so that you can bounce ideas off people, because they're probably going through the same things. So I think it's just important that we learn how to network, that the Black and Brown businesses learn how to network and not just be, you know, by themselves over in a corner, to join those professional development networks, find out who else is doing this that looks like you, and you can bounce ideas off each other and support each other during this pandemic.
Excellent, excellent.
Those are some excellent points. And succession planning, I think there's a survey that was done that about 50% of leaders don't have a succession plan. I think it's a little bit more than that. And it's critical because healthcare workers are exhausted and they're leaving, they're taking breaks. A lot of folks are leaving their organizations. There are articles of galore that are being written about the great tsunami. And so having those succession plans in place, networking so that you can have a bench or a team or a community of experts that you can lean on is really important. But I'll end this way. And I saw Dagmar's question or comment on how do you influence the shift? Number one, I think the thing that you have to do to influence the shift is, number one, take care of yourself, because we're working on fumes. We're sleeping, but we're tired. We're vacationing, but we're tired. We're leading and we're tired, right? So put your oxygen mask on first, so you have the brain space and the energy and the attention necessary to lead change. Take time for yourself, okay? Wellness is so important. Anna says you cannot pour from an empty cup. Exactly, right? So that's number one. Two, when it comes to managing change, there's so many lessons that we've learned and over the last 18 months, and we're going to continue to learn some more lessons. Think about, and this is a great time to convene your team, your experts, and say, okay, what are some of the lessons we've learned? Well, okay, how can we improve? What do we want to do differently? What should we stop doing? Okay, what are some of the priorities? What are some of the priorities? Because you can't change everything all at once. You have to prioritize. You have to reset. Some things you have to decide, you know what? We can't support this project now because our team needs time. We don't have the resources. We're managing so many other competing priorities. We have to reassess, okay? And so you have to prioritize, and then think about the resources you need to manage that change. And do you have the resources and support internally to do that? And timing is everything. As I mentioned before, not everything has to be done at once, but the important thing is that we are learning, we're growing, and we're changing. And we're not trying to regress by going back to normal, because what crisis does, crisis reveals that all is not well. And so now that we recognize that all is not well, there's so many disparities, there's so many challenges, the way we work hasn't always worked for the people, for our employees. We have to think about how we're going to move forward. And I've shared some tips on how to do that. The recording for this conversation is going to be available to you. Please check your emails. It's going to come from St. Cyr Consulting with the link and some of the resources that I mentioned. If you'd like to learn more about St. Cyr Consulting and our work around leadership development, workforce training, policy development, HR and D&I solutions, you can go to stcyrconsulting.com. The information is in the chat. And I'm looking at the comments here. We're about 3 minutes after the hour, and I will take another question or thought if anyone has it. Feel free to type it in the chat or unmute yourself if you would like to do that. Remember, we've learned a lot from the last 18 months. We cannot go back to normal because clearly normal did not work. Crisis reveals opportunities for change. The question is, how are you going to change? All right. Number one, take care of yourself, because as leaders, we need to put our oxygen mask on, okay, in order to have the mental space, the capacity, the attention span to lead change. Then we have to recognize the lessons we've learned, prioritize the ones that make sense, and we have the resource and capacity to support. Make sure that you're convening your experts, your team, your internal experts, bring in consultants if necessary, and keep moving forward. Okay, so thank you all for joining us today. Almost 100% of you stayed towards the end. It's quite clear that this was an important conversation for many. Again, I'm staying back for a few minutes. If you have a question, feel free to type it in the chat, raise your hand, or unmute yourself and ask your question, and we will respond. And thank you for those claps. Thank you. Any other thoughts?
I just would love to contribute. Thank you so much. I missed your presentation when you presented to the Irving Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. So I decided to join on here. It's just a conflict. I would love to say that I've seen several policies written by certain organizations that love to include the word tolerance. And for me, in this space, that word is unacceptable. Because we're not here to tolerate, I mean, well, as people of color, we've tolerated enough, by the way, it should be on the other side. But that when we're crafting those policies, that is so crucial to really be mindful of the words that we're using. And I will always say, wherever I go, tolerance is not a word that should be used when you're dealing with human beings. It's unacceptable. That's what I want to contribute. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you expand a little bit more on why tolerating human beings is not a word we should use or a phrase that we should use?
Absolutely, my pleasure. It's equivalent to putting up. There's no effort there. You're just there saying, oh, let me just put up with this for now because it's something that I need to do, as opposed to really crafting and employing our skills to be creative, our skill to be compassionate, our skills to connect with people. I wouldn't want to go somewhere and say, oh, I have to, I'm tolerated. No, if that's a word that comes out of any agency, then there is no sincere, there's not an approach of humanity to really get down to the level of what's happening. And that's my explanation for it. Tolerance is not a word that, you can tolerate pain to get through it, but you don't tolerate people because people is not something that you get through. It just doesn't work that way.
Thank you for that. So yes, we have to engage each other. We have to support each other. We have to be empathetic and sympathetic towards each other in order for us to partner successfully with each other. We are not islands of ourselves, and we can go much further if we can partner with each other, regardless of our backgrounds. So thank you again, Nicole, Tamika, Terry, and Anna for joining me for this important conversation. Thank you all for joining, and we'll see you next time. Please follow stcyriaconsulting.com or check out our posts on my webpage or the St. Cyr Consulting pages. And we look forward to seeing you again. Have a great day.